one of the later issues of Moon Knight where I had him going in front of a brick wall of a tenement, and all the bricks were done by hand, but they were all crooked and, uneven. I was like thinking in terms of pattern and shape and design and abstraction, and there was something, it was like I could have, used a zipatone pattern, or done it all by a ruler, but I felt like, no, this is a tenement. It's like none of it should be straight. There shouldn't be a ruler or a straight edge in this at all. And I remember I did that in a couple of places where there were like light street lights that were all crooked. I was getting so much shit just for the fact that I wasn't using a ruler, And I think it was partly lazy, but it was also, no, but a ruler is, that doesn't feel old, So I found that going toward the emotional aspect of things, the truth through the lie. So if a character was anatomically angry and just sort of yelling, I found that if I really exaggerated the mouth, like really pushed it, so that it became like theater as opposed to TV. It wasn't over there, it was over there. That's sort of like taking the Kirby stuff and the Neil Adams stuff, where it was like with Neil, it was like taking the hyper, realistic stuff, and like the hands would be coming toward you and everything else. But I wanted to kind of jump more into the David Lynchian sort of like, what is this? There's something else going on here underneath it. So rather than drawing in a consistent style, I would vary up the styles, and that would aid the storytelling. Yeah, and that was sort of like throwing everything to see what stuck, but to see what was possible. So and it was completely alien to me and to Frank and to all the editors. After 3 years of Moon Knight, I was like, I'm done with a monthly book. I can't do it, because I was also doing the FF at the same time with Joe Sinnott inking and Pablo Marcos occasionally filling in for inks. And what happened was that that was actually another big turning point for me, because I had no interest in doing 2 books a month, but they offered me the FF, and I'm not going to turn down the Fantastic Four, but I became the layout artist, because it was really Joe Sinnott's book. So if I did the Thing, Ben Grimm, I could just do the shape of him, and he would do all the rocks and Johnny's flames, So I could just draw a silhouette of this figure, and he would just add all the stuff in. And I realized that it was one of the best things I could have done in terms of my career and my development, was to take on that second book, because it forced me to simplify and to just think in terms of storytelling and just placement of objects. I wasn't immediately going in and trying to think of how many eyelashes does this character have? It was like think big, pull back, simplify, just tell a story, send the pages in. So I learned a lot, working on the FF, more than I even thought I would. It was a mixed bag of success in terms of, because they never let us really play with any of the main villains. Doug and I had to we were like a placeholder until John Byrne came in. It's supposed to be 12 issues before you got before royalties, they had an incentive program. And so if you did 6 issues, you got a certain incentive. If you did 12, and I wanted to do 12 issues, and I remember I begged Jim Salicrup, the editor, to let me do these final 2 issues, and they were like, no. I turned down the X-Men. I was called in to take it, and I felt like it was such a high profile. That was their flagship series. I was really honored that they wanted me to do it, but I also felt that with the way I even wanted to push things more in terms of abstraction and interiors. There were five issues of Moon Knight, the latter part of the run, where I felt like I was really sort of starting to find my way. And I knew that I needed to sort of take that ball and the baton and run with it even further. But when I was offered the X-Men, I said, I can't do it. It's your top selling book. I said, I don't want to take it and run it into the ditch. I said, because I may upset a lot of people, because I know that I was getting, a real polarized response. Because what was happening is that when I finally did go and start working on the New Mutants with Chris, which came about after I turned down the X-Men, Chris came up to me in the hallway and he said, I have a a 3-issue story arc. It involves Demon Bear with the New Mutants, and it's a kind of a nightmare scenario. And, I think he'd be perfect for it. And I thought, it's a nightmare, it's a dream stuff, it's horror. I'm in. It was like, this is a perfect chance to explore, like, being that subliminal kind of dream logic thing where things don't have to necessarily look like the way they do in an illustrated comic, and it could be abstract. So Chris and I started working on that, and it was so much fun. But that's when I started to really hear some of the response, like from Shooter, calling me into his office and reading me these letters from fans. It was like, stop him, Jim, before he kills again. After the New Mutants started to become successful, they called me up into the offices of the 11th floor and asked me if I would change my style to make it look more like consistent with the other X books. And I sort of felt that was kind of unusual, because it had started getting attention when I changed the style, and now they wanted me to kind of throw it back into anonymity, or like stop doing whatever it was that got the attention. I was just having so much fun pushing stuff and trying stuff. And Shooter and I, again, because we were both Polacks from Pennsylvania, he used to give me a lot of shit, like, you and your earth tones and muddy colors, and I'm like, but we busted each other's chops, but yet at the same time, he fought for me creatively, where my work was headed in terms of like all of my influences from art school to the things that were, I guess, innately in me in terms of the art movement that school kind of opened up. If I had walked into the DC offices with my portfolio from New Mutants, there's no way I would have been hired. I kind of got in like through a Trojan horse, I sort of got in doing Neil Adams, which is probably at the time was probably the most surefire way to get in, because there were so many people doing Neil. I mean, he cast a big, long shadow. So the idea of changing the styles and pushing, like Moon Knight was my cutting my teeth, and then for like just getting to understand the storytelling ropes and just getting better. Then the last 5 to 6 issues of Moon Knight was me like kind of finding the beginnings of pushing it. I didn't want to be like 9 years old or whatever and like go, I really wish I'd painted. It's like I was like, if I'm scared, I'm going. That's where I want to go. It's like I'm not going to run away. I'm going in that direction. So if I felt anxious, it was almost like a sign for me that was the way I had to go and confront it. So with the abstractions and some of the stuff I was doing, the New Mutants was in black and white with painted covers, and I sort of felt like the next logical step was to do painted interiors. So it was like each project I worked on, by the time the upper echelon said you can't do that, you're pushing it way too far, I was already okay. I'm kind of done with this anyway.